My brother's wedding invitation arrived on a Thursday. Everyone in the family got one except me. 3 weeks later, he called asking me to wire $18,000 to cover the venue deposit because apparently I was still family enough for that. What he didn't know was that the moment he hit send on that group email, he activated something I'd set up 2 years earlier. Something he'd completely forgotten about. Something that was about to change everything. We're always curious. Where in the world are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The email came in at 11:47 on a Thursday night. I know the exact time because I was still at my desk finishing a quarterly audit for one of our firm's mid-size retail clients. I'm a CPA, a certified public accountant at a regional accounting firm in Columbus, Ohio. I was 31 years old. I'd been working there for 6 years, and I was 3 months from being considered for senior associate. My whole life at that point was numbers, tax filings, balance sheets, depreciation schedules. I lived in a clean, one-bedroom apartment 12 minutes from the office. I meal prepped on Sundays. I tracked my own budget in a spreadsheet I'd built from scratch. I was good at seeing the full picture when the numbers were in front of me. I just hadn't applied that same precision to my own family. The email was from my mother. The subject line said, "Big news from the Whitmore family." She'd sent it to a family group list, my aunts, my uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years, my grandmother in Scottsdale. It contained a long, enthusiastic message about my brother Felix's engagement to his girlfriend Amber and to save the date for their wedding the following September in Napa Valley. There was a photo attached. Felix and Amber on a beach somewhere, holding hands, laughing into the camera. The email gushed about how the whole family would be coming together to celebrate this beautiful milestone. I read it twice. Then I checked my personal inbox, my spam folder, my promotions tab. I had not received a separate invitation. I had not been texted. I had not been called. I was on the group list, same as my Aunt Carol, who I see at Christmas every 3 years. But I had not been personally included. No heads up. No, we wanted to tell you first. Nothing. I sat with that for a long time. Felix is 27. He's 4 years younger than me and has always been, in the language of our family, the fun one. The spontaneous one. The one who could walk into any room and make everyone laugh within 10 minutes. I love my brother. I want to be clear about that. I have always loved my brother. But I have also, for most of my adult life, been quietly cleaning up after him. At 23, he took out a personal loan for a food truck business that lasted 8 months. My parents co-signed. When it collapsed, it dinged their credit and they called me, not Felix, to help them refinance. At 25, he moved in with my parents for 14 months after a breakup, and my mother called me every 2 weeks to say she was worried about him, and could I maybe talk to him? Could I maybe send a little something to help with his car payment just while he got back on his feet? I did. I always did. Amber came into the picture about 2 years ago. She's a wedding photographer, which I thought was fine, genuinely, until I started to notice things. The way she reframed every financial conversation in terms of energy and abundance. The way she'd started gently steering my parents toward the idea that frugality was a mindset, not a virtue. My mother, who used to clip coupons and comparison shop everything, started talking about investing in experiences. My father, who had been a high school history teacher for 30 years and was now retired on a teacher's pension and Social Security, started making comments about how my apartment was corporate and cold. Felix called me judgmental once, at Easter 2 years ago, because I pointed out privately to him, not at the table, that the Napa venue they were looking at for the wedding was going to run close to $80,000 all in. I'd seen the quote because Amber had accidentally CC'd me on an email thread she meant to forward to Felix. He told me I always made everything about money. I told him money was the reason things either happened or didn't. He told Amber I was difficult. She started calling me the accountant behind my back. I know because my mother let it slip once and then immediately tried to walk it back. The wedding invitation email came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday. I did not reply. I closed my laptop, sat in the dark of my apartment, and thought about a folder on my desktop called Whitmore Family Financial Documents. I opened it. 2 years earlier, right around the time Amber came into the picture and I started to see which direction things were heading, I'd had a conversation with my parents that I'd spent months trying to get them to agree to. My father was 63. My mother was 63. Their retirement income as pension, their combined Social Security came to about $30,400 a month. They owned their house outright, a 3-bedroom in Worthington they'd paid off the year I graduated college. They had a savings account with around $47,000 in it, a modest IRA they'd never touched, and a CD that renewed every 18 months. They were comfortable, not wealthy, they could cover their bills. What they could not afford, I kept telling them, was being the bank of first resort for a son who had never fully launched. After the food truck disaster, after the 14-month boomerang, after a series of smaller calls for help, $900 for a car repair, a $1,200 for a security deposit, I sat them down at their kitchen table and I laid it out. I printed statements. I showed them exactly what they'd given Felix in 4 years, just under $34,000. Not investments. Not loans with promissory notes. Gifts. Untracked, unreported, emotion-driven gifts. They were stunned. My mother said she didn't realize it had been that much. My father looked at the paper and didn't say anything for a long time. I told them I wasn't trying to make anyone the villain. I was trying to protect them. I told them that I'd seen what happened to people in their 60s who drained their liquid assets and then hit an unexpected medical expense or a major home repair. I was a CPA. I'd helped clients navigate exactly those situations. It was not hypothetical. I proposed something practical. I offered to take over managing their savings accounts, not to control their money, but to add a structural layer of protection. We set up a joint account where their savings would be held. I was added as a signatory. The agreement, which I wrote up formally and had all 3 of us sign, witnessed by my father's longtime friend, who was a notary, stated clearly that any withdrawal over $2,000 required my written approval and a documented purpose. My parents agreed. I think my mother agreed mostly because she was tired of worrying. My father agreed because the printed statements had scared him. I filed the signed document, kept a copy for each of us, and hoped I'd never need to use it. That had been 2 years ago. I sat in my dark apartment on a Thursday night, looking at a scanned copy of that agreement, and I thought, they have no idea. I didn't reply to the wedding email that night, or the next day. My mother texted me on Saturday, "Did you see the big news? So exciting." I wrote back, "I saw. Congrats to Felix." She sent back 3 heart emojis and nothing else. On Sunday, I called her. She answered on the second ring, bright and warm, like nothing at all had happened. She was talking about centerpieces before I could get a full sentence out. "Mom," I said, "I want to ask you something directly. Was I supposed to get a separate heads up before the group email?" A pause, not a long one. Then, "Oh, honey, we knew you'd see it with everyone. It was such a whirlwind. They got engaged, and Amber wanted to send it out right away before it got around on social media. You know how that is." "I was on the same list as Aunt Carol," I said. "Well, Aunt Carol is family." "I know she's family," I said. "So am I." My mother made a soft, impatient sound. "Laura, she used her nickname for me even though my name is just plain Leah. She always called me Laura when she wanted to soften something and thought I wouldn't notice. You're so sensitive about things like this. Felix and Amber have a million things to coordinate. They're not trying to slight you." I asked if I was invited to the wedding. Silence. "Of course you're invited," she said finally. "Although honestly, with your schedule..." I left the sentence alone, let it sit there between us. She filled the gap. "We just weren't sure if you'd be able to get the time off. You always say you're so busy." "I've never once said I was too busy for a family event," I told her. "I have missed 0 family events in my adult life. I drove 6 hours to Grandma's 80th birthday in Scottsdale. I was at Felix's college graduation in the rain. I don't miss things." She didn't have an answer for that. She pivoted to talking about how beautiful the venue was going to be and how Amber had a real vision for the whole aesthetic. I got off the phone and sat in my kitchen for about 20 minutes. Here's what I understood by then. Clearly, the wedding was in Napa. It was going to cost somewhere north of $70,000 or $80,000. Felix's income as a freelance videographer was inconsistent at best. Amber's photography business was real but young. They did not have $80,000. My parents had $47,000 in savings, a CD, and an IRA. I understood exactly what was coming. It took 11 days. The call came on a Wednesday evening. It was Felix. He almost never called me. We texted occasionally, saw each other at holidays. A call from Felix meant something. He opened with small talk, which was how I knew he wanted something, asked about work, asked if I'd seen the email about the wedding, said he hoped I was going to come, that it wouldn't be the same without me. The warmth in his voice was careful, calibrated. Then, hey, so I wanted to talk to you about something. Amber and I are trying to finalize the venue contract, and the deposit is due in 3 weeks. The place is requiring 40% upfront. I did the math instantly. 40% of the venue quote I'd seen accidentally CC'd on 2 years ago was around $18,000. I waited. He said, I was thinking, and I know this is a big ask, but Mom and Dad mentioned you help manage their savings account, and we were hoping, just as a loan, obviously we'd pay it back. I kept my voice even. What's the full venue cost? He hesitated. Around $45,000. So the deposit is $18,000? Yeah, around there. Felix, I said. Mom and Dad's savings account isn't my money, it's theirs. And the agreement we have in place means I'd need to sign off on any withdrawal over $2,000. That agreement exists to protect them. He was quiet for a second. Then his voice shifted just slightly to something more impatient. Leah, it's their savings. They want to help us. They literally told me to call you. They want to do this. I asked if they knew the full number, $45,000 for the venue, and that was just the venue. He said they knew and that it was their decision and that I was being controlling. I want you to have a beautiful wedding, I told him. I genuinely do. But I'm not going to sign off on a withdrawal that would take most of their liquid savings for an event, no matter who asks. His voice went flat. So you're just going to block it? I'm going to do what I agreed to do when we set up this arrangement, I said, which is protect their financial stability. He hung up. 20 minutes later, my mother called. Her voice was a temperature I hadn't heard in a long time, cool, tight, controlled. She said I was being rigid. She said this was the most important day of Felix's life. She said that money was theirs to spend however they saw fit, and that I had overstepped by putting myself in a position to veto their decisions like I was some kind of gatekeeper. I let her finish. Then I said, Mom, I am a gatekeeper. That's what you asked me to be 2 years ago when I showed you the spreadsheet. That's what the document says. You signed it. Dad signed it. I have the original. She said the document was just a formality. I said, it's a notarized legal agreement. It is not a formality. She said I was jealous of Felix's happiness. There it was. I've heard that word applied to me so many times in relation to my brother that it's almost lost its effect. Whenever I raise a practical concern, whenever I don't automatically fund whatever he's doing, I'm jealous. Not thoughtful. Not protective. Jealous. I told my mother that jealousy implied wanting what someone else had. I didn't want a Napa wedding I couldn't afford. I didn't want to be 27 with a spotty income and a venue deposit due in 3 weeks. She hung up. I made a cup of tea. I sat at my kitchen table. I pulled up the savings account on my laptop. I had read-only access on a monitoring dashboard, not direct transfer capability, which was intentional, and I looked at the balance. They had already made one withdrawal I hadn't been notified about, $3,200, 2 weeks ago. It was just under the notification threshold I'd set with the bank, not my threshold in the agreement, which was $2,000, but the automatic alert threshold, which I'd set higher as a backup check. Under the agreement, they'd already technically violated the terms. I sat with that information. I didn't panic. I didn't call anyone. I just noted it and filed it away, the way I do when a discrepancy shows up in a client's books. You mark it. You come back to it. My phone rang 3 more times that week. I answered once my father, who was gruff and short and told me I was making a mountain out of a molehill and that I needed to learn to let things go. I told him respectfully that I took my fiduciary responsibility seriously and that I wasn't in a position to approve the withdrawal. He said, "Fine then. Then we'll do it another way." I didn't ask what that meant. I found out 12 days later. A college friend of mine who worked at the same bank branch we use texted me, not in any official capacity, just as someone who knew me, to say that my parents had come in asking about closing a CD early. Early redemption on a CD meant penalties. Their CD was worth about $19,000. With the early withdrawal penalty, they'd net around $16,500. They were going to take a loss to get around the agreement. I called David, my father's CPA. I know another accountant. We keep tabs on each other's families the way doctors probably do, and gave him a heads up. Not to interfere, just to make sure someone else knew the picture. David said quietly that he'd been worried for a while, that Felix had called him 3 months ago asking hypothetically about whether an irrevocable designation of beneficiary could be contested. David had told him no, not without a court finding of incapacity, and Felix had gotten off the phone quickly. I printed everything: the withdrawal, the CD closure inquiry, the original signed agreement, the running total of what my parents had given Felix over 5 years, now closer to $38,000, with a new $30,000, with a new $30,000, with the projected impact on their retirement income if the savings account was drained. I put it all in a folder, and then I waited. They showed up on a Saturday afternoon. All 4 of them, my parents, Felix, and Amber. I looked through my peephole and felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not fear. Something quieter than that. The feeling you get when you run the numbers 3 times and they keep coming out the same. I opened the door. My mother came in first, already talking. She said she hoped I was ready to have a real conversation. She said she didn't want things between us to get worse. She said she loved me. I stepped back and let them in. My apartment is small, but I keep it organized. There's nowhere to hide clutter, which means there's nowhere to hide anything. I had the folder on my coffee table. I hadn't put it away. Amber looked at it. Her expression shifted slightly. My father went straight to the point. He said they'd made a decision as a family, and here he looked at me with that look I'd seen my whole life. The look that said, "You are the outlier in this room," that they were going to help Felix and Amber with the wedding, and they needed me to approve the withdrawal from the savings account. And they needed me to do it now, this week, because the venue deadline was in 8 days. Felix said nothing. He stood by the window with his arms crossed. Amber was looking at the folder. I picked it up. "I want to walk you through something," I said. My mother started to say something about how there was no need to make this into a whole production, but I kept going. I opened the folder. First page, the signed, notarized agreement. I held it up and read the clause out loud, the one that required written approval for any withdrawal over $2,000, the one they'd all been calling a formality. My mother said they knew what it said. I turned to the next page, the $3,200 withdrawal from 3 weeks ago. I placed it on the coffee table facing them. "Mom," I said, "this withdrawal happened without my approval. Per the agreement you signed, that's a violation of the terms." She opened her mouth, closed it. Next page, the CD inquiry, the projected penalty, the net loss of $2,500 they would take just to avoid coming to me. "Dad," I said, "I know you went to the bank to close the CD. I know why. And I want you to hear me say clearly, you were going to take a $2,500 penalty out of your own retirement savings rather than have a direct conversation with me. That's how much you didn't want to ask me. And I need you to think about what that says." My father looked at the table. Last page. The full 5-year total, $38,000. Untracked gifts to Felix over 5 years. Itemized, dated, sourced. Felix's arms uncrossed. He straightened up. "I'm not saying this to humiliate anyone," I told them. "I'm saying it because this is the actual picture. Mom and Dad have $47,000 in savings minus the $3,200, so now $43,800. So now $43,800. If they cash out the CD and put it toward the wedding, they'll have roughly $26,000 liquid. At their current expenses, that covers less than 8 months of a major unexpected cost. One hospital stay, one roof repair, one car replacement. That's it. And then what? The room was quiet. Amber spoke first. She said, very carefully, that this wasn't really about the money, it was about whether I supported my brother. I looked at her. I said, I've been supporting my brother since I was 23 years old. I have a spreadsheet. Felix's jaw tightened. You've always kept score, he said. You've always held everything over my head. I haven't held anything over your head, I said. I've never mentioned any of this to you before today, but you called me and asked me to sign off on your parents' retirement savings for your wedding venue. You brought the score into it. He looked away. My mother started to cry, real tears this time, not manufactured. She was looking at the 5-year total. Honey, she said to Felix, $80,000 for a wedding when we can't really— We've already signed a preliminary agreement with the venue, Amber said quickly. We'd lose the deposit. How much is the preliminary deposit? I asked. Amber looked at Felix. Felix looked at his shoes. $2,000, he said finally. $2,000, I repeated. That's what's at stake if you change venues. Not 80,000, not 18,000. 2,000. Silence. I set the folder back down on the coffee table. I said, I'm not going to approve the withdrawal, not because I don't love you, Felix, not because I don't want you to get married, but because my name is on a legal document that says I am responsible for making sure Mom and Dad don't make decisions that will hurt them. And right now, this decision would hurt them. I'm doing what they asked me to do 2 years ago. You're punishing us, my mother said. Her voice was very quiet. I'm protecting you, I said. The same thing I've always done. The same thing you set this up for me to do. My father stood up. He didn't say anything. He walked to the door and put on his coat. My mother followed him. Felix looked at me for a long moment. Not with anger anymore. Something more complicated. And then he and Amber left. I stood in my apartment alone and listened to the sound of the elevator doors. I didn't feel victorious. I'd like to be clear about that. There was no rush of satisfaction. There was just the quiet of my apartment, and the folder on the coffee table, and the low-grade hum of knowing I'd done the thing I said I would do. The weeks that followed were hard. Felix and Amber did find a different venue, a restored barn about 40 minutes outside Columbus, far more beautiful than I expected when my aunt accidentally texted me a picture of it. Lovely, actually, with string lights and an old oak out front. The wedding ended up costing closer to $22,000, which they covered with a combination of their own savings, a small amount from my parents that I approved because it was within the agreed terms, and what I later learned was a contribution from Amber's parents. My parents and I didn't speak for almost 2 months. It was my father who reached out first. He texted me on a Tuesday morning, "Are you free this weekend?" I said yes. We met for breakfast at a diner halfway between my apartment and their house. He ordered the same thing he always orders: scrambled eggs, wheat toast, black coffee, and for the first 10 minutes we talked about nothing in particular. Then he set down his fork and said, "I looked at those numbers again. The ones you printed." I waited. $38,000, he said. I didn't know it was that much. I know, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, your mother and I have been talking. I think we let things get away from us. He didn't say he was sorry. He's not someone who says that easily. But he looked at me across the diner table and said, "You did the right thing, even when it was hard. I just want you to know I see that." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice right then. Felix got married in September. It was a Saturday, and the oak tree in front of the barn was just starting to turn. Amber looked genuinely happy. Felix cried at the altar, which surprised me and made me feel something I hadn't expected. A real tenderness, uncomplicated. He hugged me at the reception. He said quietly, into my shoulder, "I know I made it harder than it needed to be." I said, "I know." That was all? My mother danced with my father after dinner. She caught my eye from the dance floor and smiled, a real one, no subtext. I drove home alone that night. I passed the exit from my parents' house on the highway and thought about all of it. The group email. The 11th word 47 timestamp. The folder on my coffee table. My father's eggs getting cold while he found the words. The agreement is still in place. It will be until they tell me they don't need it anymore, or until the day comes that they genuinely don't. I still check the account. I still run the projections. I still pick up the phone when they call. That is what the family that counts on me gets. Not a blank check, not an unlimited approval, just someone who pays attention and who will always pick up the phone. I keep thinking about that diner table, my father's eggs going cold, the way he looked at the printed numbers like they were written in a language he recognized but hadn't spoken in years. $38,000, he didn't know, and the thing is, I believe him. I genuinely do. It wasn't that he didn't care, it was that no one had ever laid it out where he had to look at it all at once. That's what I've learned about the way money moves through families. It almost never happens in one big transaction that everyone can see clearly. It happens in small amounts, in moments of emotion, in just this once, and he's going through a hard time and it would mean so much to him. And by the time you add it up, it's not small anymore. But no one saw it coming because no one was watching the whole picture. I was watching. That's the thing that has always set me apart in my family and also made me the difficult one. I pay attention. I document. I don't do it to be controlling. I do it because I do it because I've seen what happens when no one does. I've sat across from clients in their late 60s with tears in their eyes because they gave too much, too early, and now there's nothing left for what they actually need. That is not a hypothetical I invented. That is Tuesday afternoon in my office. The agreement I asked my parents to sign 2 years ago wasn't a power grab. It was an act of care. But care that comes with structure, with conditions, with a notarized signature. That kind of care doesn't feel soft. It doesn't feel warm. It feels like I don't trust you. And I've had to make peace with the fact that doing the right thing for someone doesn't always feel good to them, or to me, in the moment. What I held onto through all of it, through the phone calls and the cold silence and the 4 of them standing in my apartment, was something I can only describe as a commitment to honesty over comfort. It would have been so much easier to say yes, to approve the withdrawal, to let it go, to be the sister who showed up with a check and a smile and didn't make things complicated. I've done that version before. It never ends the way you hope. There's a version of strength that looks like giving. And then there's the harder version, the one that looks like withholding, that gets you called jealous and controlling and rigid, but is actually just refusing to participate in something you can see will cause harm. That version requires you to stay steady when everyone in the room is looking at you like you're the problem. It requires you to know the difference between what people want and what they need, and to hold that line even when it costs you something. Felix hugged me at the reception. The barn was beautiful. My mother danced with my father. None of that would have happened the same way if I had written the check. I still check the account. I still run the projections. I still pick up the phone. Not because I need to be in control. Because I made a promise, and I'm someone who keeps them.